Hey everybody, welcome to Grind and Flow, an ongoing conversation about creativity and the pursuit of meaningful work. I'm Chuck Moore, and you're about to hear my conversation with master brewer Peter Kiley of Monday Night Brewing, which is always on the short list of Atlanta's most popular and fastest growing craft breweries. Trust me, they will be coming to your town soon if they aren't there already. Peter and his prolific brewing team at Monday Night continue to rack up impressive accolades in arenas like the World Beer Cup and the Craft Beer Marketing Awards. But to me, what's most impressive is that Monday Night Brewing was voted 2019 Employer of the Year by its own employees in an Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll. And if you want to know why, just listen here in a moment to Peter passionately talk about his team's process as they fearlessly explored new worlds of flavor and ingredients the same way a visionary film director and crew wield light and shadow. Disclaimer here, I am absolutely not a beer guy. I'm all about the bourbon or gin, thank you very much, but I found all this fascinating and inspiring. In particular, something Peter introduced me to called the Dunning-Kruger Effect. So get ready, here's Peter Kiley in a very noisy, active brew pub just before the lunch rush. Enjoy. So, what the hell is the Dunning-Kruger Effect?
What is the Dunning-Kruger Effect? I'm gonna probably not phrase this well. The way I have interpreted it over the years is that essentially it's this idea where people that claim to know the most tend to know the least. And then people that walk around with this kind of stance of humility that understand that they don't know anything tend to, maybe not immediately, but tend to over time know the most. Because once again, when you think you know it all, you're not gonna be hungry. Maybe it's the pride, maybe it's the other things that hold us back. But people that are hungry tend to eat more.
What is the place that you get to if you become aware of the Dunning-Kruger Effect?
Oh, it's a beautiful place. Once you realize that you don't know anything in comparison to all that there is to know, you fall. It could be akin to depression, right? Especially for the ones that are the most curious. When you realize that you know nothing, you're in the, as I call it, the pit of despair. You fall down the valley. You're up here, you think you got it all figured out, you think you're on top, and then you realize what you don't know, and then you just drop. It's the humbling aspect. I think the humility has to be in conjunction with creativity and with development, right? They all require some level of hard work. So if you walk into it prideful, you probably won't get there quick. But once you realize that you don't know, you fall. And then when you land, that very bottom, that right there is the pit of despair. And you want to claw your way out of there as quickly as humanly possible. So what you do is you go look for parts, you figure out what you need to do, and you build your rocket ship. And you put it on the launch pad, and then you start moving. You get up there. You have to start going, because you realize you don't want to ever be there. I have this imaginary race that happens in my brain. If I'm not learning, like every day, if I'm not pushing myself to change the way that I think about things, take on new data, change my assumptions, just overall just learn new concepts. But if I'm not doing that daily, I imagine there's someone right next to me in that car and they're scooting ahead. And then I'm like, oh man, and the fuel for that vehicle, right, for that rocket, that drive that you're looking for, that's something that you're completely responsible for.
I am currently in a valley. I hate to call it valley of despair, that sounds so defeatist.
The pit of despair.
Now, the more I learn, it's hard to not be overwhelmed by how much you don't know.
Yes. You're on the launch pad. Sometimes a dangerous place to be on the launch pad unless you're in the rocket. Yep. And even the rocket can be dangerous too at times. I think that pride is this remarkable set of handcuffs, right? Pride is this thing that stops so many people from actually getting to that next place, to the next answer, or creating the next question that allows for that next door to be open, and the causality of curiosity. And unless you have the endurance of curiosity, it can burn you out, right? Just knowing that there's so much to know, and especially if you're trying to be a perfectionist at the same time and really encapsulate all of it and say, I got it figured out, because you don't. You never will. And so I think that emotional intelligence, whether you call that maturity or you just call it exposure, I don't know what it is, but for the right people, it's beautifully lifelong stimulation. And for the wrong people, it is, are we done yet? Are we there yet?
A little background here. Peter briefly shared his struggles growing up with ADHD and dyslexia, but in later school years, he found his groove navigating the rigor and complexity of chemistry, then parlayed that into early success as a winemaker and sommelier. But I get the sense, and I think you will too, that Peter has found his calling as a master of what he calls the people's liquid. Who are you? Where are we? And what do you do around here?
Who am I? My name is Peter Kiley. We are currently at Monday Night Brewing, the garage facility in Southwest Atlanta, which is the home of all of our barrel aging beers and our specialty brands. And I, Peter Kiley, am our brewmaster.
Pretend I'm 5 years old. What does that person do? What does the brewmaster do?
So a brewmaster means a lot of things depending on the house that you're in. But for me personally, what it means here is that I am accountable for all the beers that we make. Whether it's the outcome of the beers, the creativity behind some of the beers, the team that conducts themselves while making the beers, everything about our beer and about our program here starts sometimes with me, but it always ends with me.
So if I followed you around, all this experimenting, is it you slinging flavors together, throwing hops up in the air? What would I see if I followed you?
No, it's actually much more subdued than that. It's actually probably more boring than anyone wants to know. Creativity and exploration starts in my world as me writing a miniature press release to myself. I say to myself, why does this beer need to exist? What am I exploring? How am I going to get there? What tools and supplies do I need? And who do I need to bring with me? And when you do that and you really write it out, you can really quickly find out, do you actually want to go there? Is this really a good idea? Are you shooting a gun just because you have a gun? Or are you really going to aim at something? Luckily, you have a team, because they'll say, okay, I agree with this. Or have you thought about this? Or do we have time to do that right now? Or matter of fact, is this the right time to seek those ingredients out? The best way to die on an exploration is to go by yourself. So, I like to have the team. So when we really explore, it tends to be something that buy-in is one of the greatest sources of fuel for any long exploration. So I want buy-in from my team. I want to talk to them about what I want to do. So everyone starts with the press release. Write about it, share it. Before you even start on it, talk about it. Because if you can't talk about it, matter of fact, if I hear you talk about it and you're not even passionate about it, why would anyone else be passionate about it? I want to see passion dripping off of those words. I want to see someone, as they type it up, they can barely contain themselves. That's what I want to see. I want to see passion. So the press release is not usually just as a hurdle. It's not some obstacle before you get to go. It's to prove to someone and to others that they should go there. I've done this before, and I hate to admit this. There'll be times when I see someone put out their pitch, and I'll say no, just to let themselves see and everyone else see how passionate they are. There has to be passion. There has to be intent. There has to be drive. If you don't have those, don't go. Get off the rocket ship. Get off the launch pad. Let someone else step up. But if it is there, I can't wait to press that button with you. Let's go. From there, we have a lot of those people. We hire for that, right? So there tends not to be a shortage of passion on our team. So with passion and with acumen and with understanding of how this game works, how the science of beer works, we can go a lot of places. And we push the boundaries often.
Talk about hit some high points on the differences in beer and wine, and how you guys are different in terms of your experimentation. And you gave me some stats. Let me see if I got them right. About most breweries may do 16 new flavors a year, but you guys do a lot more.
Oh yes, the prideful brags. So what are the differences between beer and wine, in my opinion? When it comes to wine, you're working with the grapes you have, the region that you're growing it in, the terroir, right? Think of all these concepts that we have a pretty firm idea about. Where you grow it matters the most. So wine is in this one bucket, right? Let's put it in its own sandbox. The next sandbox is beer. And beer is something where once I figured out this idea, which I'm about to share with you about beer, it changed how I thought about it completely. Wine is here, right? It's very structured. The barrels, the oak, everything was kind of set in place. Maybe some versatility within the yeast you use. But usually a lot of these established families are coming from the same exact place, the same land and everything. Now with beer, all of a sudden, not only are there far more beer styles than I think there are even varietals of grapes to use to begin with, but then from there, it's undefined. In so many places, I can go take A through Z grains, put them together with A through Z hops, and then go pick A through Z yeast. The things I can choose from to create something unique is so much more of a library than ever with wine. I can go throw cinnamon into one. I can throw marshmallow. I can go throw nuts of all kinds. I can almost do anything. Imagine painting your whole life with one hand tied behind your back. All of a sudden, you get to now paint like you're an octopus. You've got like 8 arms and you can do all these things. And the coolest part is that I can taste a lot of this in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. The wines I was working on, 10 months, year and a half, 3 years. All of a sudden, I realized that if I was a scientist before, or thought I was, maybe I was, but now I had never gotten to play with variables like this before. Everything was constants. I was now in a world of variables. Beer is the world of variables. So when I think about what beer can be, what it should be, what it could be, those are just 3 different conversations I have at the same time. And I love to say, okay, my personal idea of what beer is that if I were to make a base style beer, I will make it grade A, true to style. I'll really try to understand it. I will go as far as to mimic the water on an ionic level as the same region that beer was originally made in. From there, I'll say to myself, do I want to change anything about this? I think that's why so many people have gotten into craft beer. It's not because it's sticking it to the man or it's walking away from the corporate life. Maybe it is at times, but it's also the Wild West, right in your backyard. And to be able to explore with like-minded people that are curious about how flavors can be, all we're doing is exploring flavor, and we're capturing history, and then we're almost in a way creating a future. I mean, I haven't experienced anything like it before. And as someone that's been hooked on stimuli since day one, I have found my forever drug. And I think it's cool as shit. And I would never give it up for anything. So, there are times when I'll barrel age a beer, right? And I'll put it in wine barrels. I'll even use wine grapes. Then I'll make a heterofermentive product where I'll even hybridize it fully. It's done those things. Sometimes I will take winemaking methodology and apply it to a beer. Oftentimes, I will let beer sit in barrels for a year, 2 years, 3 years. I have a beer that just came out. It took 5 years to make. I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. My wife always jokes, I can make 2 children faster than you can make 1 beer. And so, there's still this idea, this prestige, right, that we capture in wine so well. You can bring that here. Beer's always been the people's liquid, but I disagree with that. It's everyone's liquid too, but it can be just as fancy as any wine. And over time, I promise you, that a lot of these beer producers will be held in the same reverence as a lot of these wine producers. Obviously with a much shorter history, but over time, we're all doing the same thing. We're trying to explore, trying to preserve and explore, preserve and explore.
Throw some numbers at me about how many different flavors you guys do versus other people.
Oh, it's hard to compare us to others, right? So I would say we'll do about 130 unique beers this year. Our program consists of pretty much every single style of beer that you can make at some point. And as we continue to evolve, it's Atlanta. We have to be a little bit of everything for everyone all of the time. So luckily, we have this great encouragement of this city, this hyper-transient city, to constantly be adding new music to our playlist. When you come to our tap rooms, I want you to come here every single week and see something new. Usually it's not just one thing new. On average right now, per month, we are releasing anywhere from 12 to, like 8 to 14 beers a month. From our barrel aging facility, to our wild and sour stuff, to our IPAs, our lagers, our historicals, saisons, you name it. And so much of that is deeply rooted in the fact that I wish someone would have told me back in the day that ADHD is an amazing thing to have for a job like this. Everyone always tried to medicate, tell you shouldn't do these things, slow this down, focus on one thing, but no.
Do you think think that you are good at explaining things that are instinctual and arguably subjective?
No, not at all.
So how do you win your arguments?
It's a really good question. How do I win my arguments? Sometimes, as a young man, I've relied on my agency, and I tend not to do that anymore. The young man in me would be like, "What? This is my job. I'm leading this pack. We're just going to do this," and that's not inspiring at all. In fact, that's a cop-out. It's bullshit. So I tend to actually not win my arguments the first time anymore. What we need to do, I think, with development's always disguised as hard work, right? We know that. But sometimes, if appropriate, you have to allow someone to see it with their own eyes. Sometimes that's the best lesson you can teach someone, is allow them to go to the place that you already went and to create the same assumption that you already did. Because for a real creative, they have to go there on their own at some point.
On the choice.
They do. They have to go there. Now, when I think about the arguments that I tend to fight the most on, being an Atlanta native, when I make beer, I make it for Atlanta, right? I really, really take immense amount of pride in knowing what my city likes. I do not make beer for myself. Craft beer in this house is almost as selfless as I've ever seen it. We truly make beer for the people of this city. Luckily, Atlanta is booming. It's so diverse. It's everything, everyone, all the time. We don't get to be a thing. We get to be all the things. And somewhere in that magic, we've also found that it works with other markets too. Because within what's represented in Atlanta tends to be representation of everywhere in the Southeast. A little more diverse beautifully over here than in other places in the Southeast. But if we can win here, we tend to win most other places. So from there, I think that when I fight for what I'm making, why I'm making it, what and why, right? Most people trust me here now. I also own my failures better than most. I'm not going to sit there and die on the hill when I know it's wrong. I am the first person to tell someone when something sucks. And I'm usually the first person to tell me when something sucks.
Have you always been that way?
I've always been that way. Whether you call it imposter syndrome, you call it just an immense amount of healthy doubt, I think that my greatest joy is not from what I make, it's from watching people experience what I've made. I'm a people pleaser. And it's taken me a while to really say that with pride and not embarrassment.
So when you, going back to where you say letting others see it with their own eyes and letting them own the choice, was there a light bulb moment or several light bulb moments that kind of taught you that lesson?
Oh, absolutely. When I think about the light bulb moments that led me to that thinking was every single bad manager I've ever had. People that wouldn't let me see it, they just told me to trust them. What an uninspiring way of going about doing things. Especially when it comes to, a lot of these ideas are scientific in nature. There's the causality, the reaction of what leads to what. Let me go on that road if I can. Or when that road's happening, bring me along. So many people just told me, it's just how it is. And then I'd look at them and I would say, well, I don't fully respect everything that you're doing. And oftentimes, I actually don't believe that you know what you're doing. So why would I trust you? I think that when you allow someone to go somewhere that you've been before, knowing that it's not going to hurt them, right? It's a safe journey. You get to see them come back changed. You get to see how they look at it again. And you know what they do after that? They trust you even more. They say, you're right. Matter of fact, you let me go there knowing that I was going to be wrong. And that right there is how you build trust. And then when I have to go put my card down and say, guys, we can't argue about this one. We just got to do this. I get to win that the first time because I won every other one the second time. One promise I made to myself. If I was right, I would help everyone to understand why, and I wouldn't take credit for it. And if I was wrong, I would want to understand why and have everyone else understand why and take complete credit for it. And I think that's been one of these things where I've balanced well, because sometimes people care more about the times that you admitted you're wrong than the times that you were right. That's also how you build trust in a team. It's like when the light shines on you, make sure it shines on everyone you last. And then when the shadows come down and it rains, try to have it only rain on you.
There you have it. Thank you, Peter Kiley. Now, we taped the interview months ago, but I still think about much of what Peter said. In summation, the Dunning-Kruger Effect is very real, and relentless and humble curiosity is your jet fuel out of despair. Number 2, if you think you've got a great idea, write it out in a press release. And last but not least, number 3, people will remember more of the times you admitted to being wrong than the instances you were right. And that's it for this episode of Grind and Flow. Please consider subscribing on YouTube or other favorite podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and at some point soon, TikTok. I'm Chuck Moore. Thanks for listening, y'all. Seriously, see you soon.